Hello, I'm Omita Bakshi Chatterjee, and joining me today is Minister of State for Electronics and IT, Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Mr. Rajeev Chandrasekhar. Vocal and articulate about all things reforms and governance, Mr. Chandrasekhar is a 3-time MP, a technocrat, and an entrepreneur. Thank you so much for speaking to PTI, sir.
Thank you.
I'm very glad that we are talking at a time when you're on the verge of crafting the draft Digital India Bill. And before I get into that, I wanted to just step back and ask you about this whole legislative framework that we are drawing out, given our tech ambitions, given the fact that you have been very vocal about not allowing big tech to corner policies, the need for guardrails and the border conditions for big tech. How is India looking at this entire area of regulation and legislation?
So, thank you for having me on the show. Look, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji's vision on technology started way back in 2015, and he laid out multiple goals for the nation. Very clearly, he wanted Indian startups, Indian youth, and the innovation ecosystem in India to develop to such a level that India will no longer be a consumer of technologies, but also produce technologies and solutions for the world. Now, if you look at that and you then talk about the goal that he has set for the digital economy of $1 trillion by 2026, it is clear that you need a modern framework of laws that enable our young Indians, young startups to excel, to grow, to be part of this global innovation ecosystem. And therefore, he has conceived this very modern global standard framework, in which there is a Digital India Act, which basically is a supersession of the IT Act, which is a 22-year-old act. There's a Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, and there will be a National Data Protection Policy. So this triumvirate, if you want to call it that, constitutes the boundary conditions, the framework that will deliver an open, a safe and trusted, and an accountable internet, and an innovation ecosystem that sits on top of it. So that is broadly our thinking. We are making, as you have seen from our efforts, we are making steady progress towards that. But it is a commitment that we have to the people of India, 1.2 billion Indians who are going to use the Indian internet, that we will keep the internet open for them. We will deliver safety and trust on the internet for them. And we will make sure that regardless of whether you're big tech or small tech, Indian or foreign, that consumers will always have their platforms accountable to them.
What is this new Digital India Act all about, and why was there a need to overhaul the IT Act of 2000? And do you think these efforts would ultimately lead to a complete change in, a change of relationship between how big tech has interacted with consumers and citizens so far?
First of all, we must understand that in the technology world, change is a normal. As we look to the future and we look to the past, disruptions are going to be increasingly the normal. What we see today is not what the tomorrow is going to be. What we see today was certainly not what yesterday was. And so we are essentially creating these laws and rules to help plan, help make this movement forward as non-disruptive as possible, so that people who invest, people who innovate, people who consume technologies are all people who can see those changes and accept those changes in a non-disruptive manner. Certainly, it can be argued that for several years now, big tech, and whether they are the search engines like Google, whether they are social media platforms, have escaped regulation, have in a sense avoided being regulated by governments all around the world because they masqueraded as innovations. So therefore, whether it is the US, whether it is Europe, whether it's India, we've looked at for the last decade, as the internet has proliferated, we've looked at these platforms as innovators. Unfortunately, for most governments all around the world, and consumers are also finding out, that as much good these big platforms do, they certainly help you search faster, but they also track your movement. They certainly misuse their, as the Competition Commission has recently pointed out, certainly they allow you to do many things more efficiently, but they're also certainly misusing their market power and market dominance. So there are many things that are wrong about the big tech platforms, even as they masquerade as innovations and they do good. So our approach is they must continue to add value to the lives of our citizens, but not exploit our citizens, not exploit data, not exploit their conduct or behavior. And therefore, these guardrail approach that we are taking, the user harm regulation that we are taking, the prism of user harm, is the basic principle of making sure, regardless of whether you're big tech or small tech, foreign or Indian, the Indian digital nagrik, the Indian consumer's rights to data protection and privacy, Indians consumers' rights to having a safe and trusted internet will never be compromised, will never be diluted.
If I look at the internet of 2000 and the internet today, there is a world of difference.
Right.
2 decades is a long time. There are new kinds of online harm that have come up. There is doxing, there is identity theft, algorithm risks from algorithms, algorithmic biases. As also the whole nature of intermediary itself has changed, right? I mean, intermediary in 2000 was perhaps just a very single, one-sided platform. And now we look at the fact that there could be e-commerce entities, there could be gaming, there could be fact-checking, social media platforms as well. Will DIA look at one classification of intermediaries perhaps for the first time in India, and second, also the newer kinds of user harm, online user harm that are emerging?
Oh, absolutely right, and I think you have obviously studied this space in detail. You are absolutely right that the internet in 2000, when the IT Act was enacted, and the internet in 2022, 2023, they are, from a complexity point of view and a diversity point of view and a risk point of view and a harm point of view, two very different animals. And therefore, it is certainly clear, to answer your previous question, that a legislative framework that dealt with a benign internet, an internet that only did good, therefore that legislative framework is certainly not going to be useful in a framework where in an era where the internet is not just good, but it is also bad. It is not just about doing good, it's also about several layers of user harm and complex user harm. It is certainly not about the internet having only one intermediary which connects the user to the internet. Now there are many, many different types of intermediaries with very different characteristics of benefits, harms, risks, etc., etc. And you've rightly touched upon algorithmic biases, algorithmic accountability as challenges that are all being thrown up into the internet. The Digital India Act is an act that proposes to address these issues. But we will not address this by making it very complex to resemble the complexity of the internet. It will be based on very simple principles, like I said, that the internet should always be open. There should be no disruption of the choice that an Indian consumer has. Nobody should be able to assert or use or misuse their market power to distort choices. The internet should be safe and trusted. 120 crore Indians, old and young, women, men, children and aged, are all going to use the internet for their lives, for their pensions, for their benefits, for their education, for skilling. So we cannot afford to have our internet to be anything but safe and trusted, where anybody who does user harm is immediately identified and held accountable under the law. So we are moving, like you said, from an era of a very simple internet to a very complex internet, from an era of internet doing good to an internet as much as representing bad. And therefore, the legislative framework is going from the IT Act to the Digital India Act.
Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi has talked about India's decade, and indeed it's a decade full of tech opportunities. You yourself talked about this being the most exciting time ever. A couple of days back, I was listening to you, and this is the most exciting time ever in the history of independent India, is what you said. I wanted to ask you, therefore, there are so many things that are rolling out right now: the Make in India, the PLI, the semiconductor program, and we're seeing a testimony of India's preeminence. We are seeing a global recognition. I think a string of CEOs are coming down and coming here and talking to you and looking at their plans in India. When it comes to PLI and these schemes that have been launched, what are the outcomes and the results you're looking? Have those results already started bearing fruit?
No, look, the mobile phone, smartphone PLI is an example of how a visionary PLI, a dream of the Prime Minister, can really create an absolute industry from almost scratch. And I can share with you, when Tim Cook came and met me, the CEO of Apple, he said even Apple was so happy with the way the Indian manufacturing ecosystem could ramp up so fast post-COVID to support Apple's own ambitions of manufacturing in India. So, look, I think none of this has been easy, none of this has been overnight. The Prime Minister took a very deep visionary call in 2015 that we must create more manufacturing jobs, more manufacturing investments. India must be a competitive manufacturing economy, and we are showing that with smartphones. And I think for smartphones, the sky is the limit, and we have a lot of headroom for growth, investments and jobs. We have now announced the IT hardware, the PLI 2.0. And I am very, very confident that over the next 3 to 4 years, you will see India becoming a very significant player in the IT hardware supply chains and value chains for the world, for servers, for laptops, for tablets. So that's the second piece that we have launched. And hopefully down the road, we will create some program to encourage India to becoming a hub for wearables and hearables, which is the headphones and the smartwatches, which is because that is another category that is growing very fast in the world. So our electronics ambitions in the consumer segment are fairly well understood. Our target is to reach $300 billion by 2026, of which $120 billion will be exports. Currently, we are at 75 billion. So it's almost a 3.5x or 4x jump in revenues, and almost a 10 times growth in exports.
So last few questions. PM is slated to visit the US. He's on an official state visit between June 21 and 24. What kind of enhancement of cooperation can India and US look at in areas of emerging technology?
You know, when Secretary of Commerce, US government was here, Gina Raimondo was here, there's a tremendous MOU signed about India and US cooperating in critical technologies, which includes AI, quantum, semiconductors. And these are the 3 areas that the Prime Minister is very, very focused on for the future of the country. AI, quantum and semiconductor. And in addition to everything else in terms of the supply chain. So I hope that relationship continues to grow. It's a win-win relationship. We have the talent, we have the capability. The US has technology, the US has innovation, and it is a very, very complementary partnership, the India-US partnership. Similarly, the Indo-EU Technology Trade Council meeting, for which I was also a participant, is again a partnership that increasingly the world's large economies are aligning and partnering with India. And all of this really means that the future 10 years, which the Honorable Prime Minister has called the India Decade, or the decade of the world, will be a decade where India certainly will be in partnership with these open countries and open societies, playing a leading role, and Indian startups and innovators will play a leading role in shaping the future of tech.
So before I let you go, I have to get your voice in on this whole debate around the new parliament building inauguration. There are 19 opposition parties that have talked about boycotting the inauguration. Do you just see the politics? Is it just really politics?
No, it is not even politics. It is a petty politics of the worst kind. The current parliament is a parliament built by the British, built in pre-independent India. And here we are in 2023 celebrating a parliament built by independent India, built at a time when India is being recognized and feted as the preeminent democracy of the world. And if some political parties choose not to participate and celebrate the parliament, which is, by the way, a parliament of all of us, that parliament does not belong to one political party, it belongs to the democracy that is India. If they choose not to do it, it is, in my opinion, unfathomable what type of fringe thinking, what type of thought process goes in the minds of people, where even when it comes to celebrating something that is a celebration of Indian democracy, you choose to sit out and you choose to pout and be petulant and play petty politics. So we will leave it at that. India is a country today is on the rise. India is a shining power. And if some Indians don't want to celebrate what the rest of the world is celebrating, that is up to them. It's a free nation. It's a free choice.
Mr. Rajeev Chandrasekhar, you're a very busy man. I know you pack in a lot. Thank you for taking out time for PTI and speaking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.